So good morning. So Mike Stevens, allow me to toot your horn for you for a quick second.
Hi, Joe.
Mike, sorry, Travis, going to talk right over you there just for a second.
All good.
Mike, we met back when Mike was Second Fleet, Third Fleet, and very good relationship with some numbered fleets working together, and then then to MCPON and then to Fleet, and work together there. So good to see you, Mike.
No, it's good to see you, Joe. Joe and I worked together for more than a decade.
Wow.
And she was a tremendous Fleet Master Chief and a tremendous leader for the Navy. So it's good to see you, and congratulations on all the good work you're doing.
Thank you. All right, I'm gonna dart out so you and have this time for Mike. I'm gonna stay on and listen, but I appreciate everything you're doing with this, and I appreciate change. And I just want to close really quick by saying, I appreciate every sailor that's out there now. What you're doing now, what you have done, and what you're about to do. Every sailor faces some form of crisis at one point, and during this COVID-19, I'm so impressed with how you're adapting to new nav admins and how you're adapting to change, and you're leading and processing and executing changes that are necessary for you personally and for us professionally in the Navy. And thank you for raising the next generation.
That's awesome. Jen, thank you so much for your time. Continue doing great things for the community and our country. And obviously we'll be in touch. So thank you so much for your time, Joanne.
All right, Ortloff out.
I love it. All right, Mr. Stevens, let me take a minute to chat with you for a second. Make sure everybody knows we have, for the record, we have actively almost 300 people watching us now from around the globe, and more might be watching otherwise. And so first off, so anybody who doesn't know, obviously the first few people are obviously Navy centric, because that's of course near and dear to my heart. You're going to see that we're going to change pace here this afternoon, but Mike was our 13th Master Chief Petty Officer of the Navy. I'm going to have to ask you, like, how did you feel about being the 13th one? And now is currently the Executive Director of our Navy League. And what I'm super excited about, Mike, is you are literally the first enlisted man to hold that position. So thank you for your time, Mike. Good morning.
Hey, good morning, Travis.
So, Mike, with everything you're doing, again, taking time out of your day, I know you're a busy person. With regards to your time in the military, I got to tell a quick story because, although I remember when I first reached out to you, I'm like, I know you don't remember me, but, I was in my CMC school when you came and spoke to us. And this is going to be a great segue story because well, actually, let me stop with it a second because I got to stick to my tradition, okay? So you probably picked up, I'm going to ask you an interesting question to kick things off. So if you were a tree, what kind of tree would you be and why?
Oh, let's see. I think I'd be an apple tree.
Okay.
I hope to be someone that bears good fruit.
I love it. I love it. And just so you know, ladies and gentlemen, I do not prep these guys for their answers. So that's a great off the cuff answer. So back to my story. So as I was in class, we were going through, and it is a great kind of segue from the theme, what we were just talking to Joanne about, and that is managing change. And while I was in there, you came to speak to us literally the day before. You made a huge announcement to the Navy. Now, I don't want to take up your time going in and reliving that time, but I want to make a point that you made a decision that was popular with some, not popular with others, but you had to make that unpopular decision, and that was sundowning a lot of the tradition, as we call it, from our chief petty officers. And to give a little backstory, we've had it in called many different things through the years, but initiation, when you make chief, it's one of the biggest transitions you'll make in your naval career. And in the old days, there was a lot of hazing involved. We've been slowly but surely transitioning it. And I remember being in my class going, wow, like I got to hear directly from you the mindset of what goes behind it. And it goes back to what I mentioned before. You know, there's three sides to every story: his side, her side, somewhere in the middle is the truth. We got to hear the truth directly from you. So long story leading into that, of course, kind of all hell broke loose the next day when you released it. So my question is, how did you handle it that time that you had to make that unpopular decision at the time, but in my opinion, the right one at the time?
Sure, and Travis, we spoke a little bit about this a week ago. There's more to this than we have time to discuss, and I really want to.
Exactly.
really
I'm not
want to
looking
get
for a long
into.
thing. It's kind of a short thing that you can get to it. And then I'm going to turn it over to you anyways.
Sure, no, and I'd like to get to the topic that I'd like to share with the group. But before we get started, I do want to say thanks to all the sailors, and I suspect there'll be some folks that are not in the Navy that are on this I'll call it a simulcast or video leadership conference. I just wanted to thank all of them for joining us today, and to let them know how much I care about them and appreciate all they do, how much Teresa and I care about their families. And we hope that they're all safe and that they're healthy and taking very good care of themselves. So I wanted to start by that.
Thank you.
With regards to the question you just asked me, I'll leave everyone with something to contemplate. Because as I mentioned, there was so much more to that than probably most people will ever know, and more than I ever want most people to know, because when leaders make decisions, they have to own those decisions, and I own it. But what I shared with you is we should always be looking around us. And it's at one point, I asked myself this question: when your traditions are not in keeping with your values, your core values, what do? Do you adjust the tradition, or do you adjust your values? And in that case, even though I would submit to everyone that the vast majority of the things that we were doing were good. They were developing sailors into becoming good chief petty officers and leaders and all the things that you want that season to do. But there were also some things that we were doing that weren't good. And I felt those things were, not only I, but others, many others felt that those things were not in keeping with our tradition, our values. And so the decision was, do you change the value? Do you change the tradition? And that's when the decision was made that we have to make some adjustments to what we were currently doing. And part of that was just simply getting away from the stigma that had become associated with the words initiation and tradition and so on and so forth. And later down the road, once those stigmas were removed, you could always change those names back to whatever you wanted. Mm-hmm. But we went to a program, as people know, is called CPO 365. And truth be told, a lot of chiefs messes were already doing that. It was a little bit of plagiarism, to be honest with you. Because I remember going out to Bahrain, and I think it was, it was late 2012. I went out to Bahrain. No, I take that back, because I was still a fleet master chief. I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. So it was actually 2010. And I went out to Bahrain because we were working on the CPO 365 concept before I became the MCPON under Rick Westwatch. And they had a guide on out there in their CPO mess in the corner, and it said CPO 365 on it. And then I asked the command master chief, what was that about? And he said, well, we believe that leaders aren't developed in 6 weeks. We believe it's a year-round process. So we have this thing that we do, right? And we talked through it, and I said, wow, that's crazy, because we're actually talking about that right now. We don't have a name for it, but how do we develop leaders year-round, vice, this short period of time where we try to inject it all at once? And so I got back on the plane, and on my way back, I wrote a sketch, essentially, of CPO 365. And MCPON West, and at the time, MCPON Benning and I, a few others got together, and we started talking about it. But change of that magnitude isn't something that you can do overnight. But if you remember, CPO 365 actually started under MCPON West Watch, but it was CPO 365/induction. right? So this wasn't just yanking the Band-Aid off. This was an incremental step, an evolutionary step to get where we ended up being. But anyways, just to recap, that was the genesis behind it. Is when your traditions are not in keeping with your values, you have to make a decision. And we believe that the core values of honor, courage, and commitment are good values. They're sound values, and there's lots behind it. And there were some things that were going on at that time that weren't in keeping with those values. And so look at the Chief Petty Officers we're producing today. They're the best. They're the best in the history of the Navy, as it should be. And those Chief Petty Officers should be using what they're learning to develop the next generation of Chief Petty Officer. And I'm convinced that the Navy has always gotten better, will always continue to get better. And the young men and women that are raising their right hand, signing up to serve today, are bar none the best citizens that our country has, and they're producing the best sailors that we've ever had.
Absolutely, man. Well, Mike, I couldn't agree with you more. And what you just said hit it right on the head. Sometimes in any organization, you have to shrink to grow, and look where we're at today. It's just grown to an amazing process, and making that unpopular decision had to realize, people have realized that, holy crap, maybe he knew what he was doing there. So that's great. So thanks for doing that and being our leader through that time. So that being said, I don't want to take anything else away from you, Mike. I know you have a great topic that you want to talk to. Specifically, this is about leading yourself, and that can be a challenge all its own. So what I'd like to do now is we're going to shift gears a little bit for everybody who's watching. You're going to have to stop staring at my ugly mug, and I'm going to turn the table over to Mike. He has kind of his own thing that he wants to talk through. Mike, I will be listening in. So when I see you kind of coming to an end, we're going to try to carve out a little time at the end to answer any questions that come through, and then we'll go from there. How's that sound?
That sounds great. Thanks, Travis.
Awesome. Without further ado, our 13th Master Chief Petty Officer of the Navy, Mike Stevens.
All right. Well, once again, good morning or good afternoon to everyone, depending on what coast you're on, or who knows what part of the planet that you're on. What I'd like to talk to everybody about today is a subject that I call leading yourself. Now, I would also say that, I've been out of the Navy almost 4 years now, and I have been fortunate enough to learn to learn a lot more about leadership as I've worked in the private sector. After I got out, I was the chief operating officer for a small company, and then later on became the chief executive officer. Had the responsibility of, P&L statement. It's a statement where you have your projected gains and losses, and you're building out budgets for organizations and working through civilian HR. You have shareholders that you have to generate revenues for, bonuses for employees, salaries for employees. All those things they're challenging. And I will say that the Navy was challenging when I was in, but for a different reason. So to all of our folks that are leading in the private sector and doing right by your people and leading good organizations, my hat's off to you, because I've learned in the 4 years that I've been out that that's no easy task. And I've learned a lot about leadership in a different sort of way since I've been in the private sector. But back to what I wanted to talk to everybody about, it's leading yourself. So when I talk to people about this, I kind of start off by saying, until you can lead yourself, you will never be able to effectively lead others. Think about that for a second. As a leader, you're out there, you're supposed to be influencing, you're supposed to be guiding, directing people to carry out their assigned tasks, to handle life's problems, to deal with challenging situations, to be good critical thinkers. But if you're not leading yourself, if you're not the person that you want them to be, how influential are you? And you heard, both Mick Pond Smith and Joanne Orloff, talk about influence. And I think Dave Deary said it right off the bat when he said, John Maxwell's definition of leadership is one's ability to influence others. So how do we expect as leaders to influence others when we're not truly leading ourselves? So what does that mean to lead ourselves? I break it down in some different categories. It's physical, mental, moral, and spiritual leadership, right? So let's talk a little bit about the physical aspect of leadership first. So leading yourself physically. So we think about that, okay, I'm gonna work out, I'm gonna take care of myself, I want to have a strong body, those sorts of things. So what does that mean? Like, why is that important? Well, I found that it's important for a number of different reasons. One is it helps you to reduce stress. It helps you take your mind off of things that are bothering you. It allows you to handle the challenges, the stressful challenges that you face day to day. It creates resilience. And depending on your job, it may allow you to do your job better. Being stronger, more physically capable, gives you the strength to do the work that you need to do if your work involves, any kind of physical stamina. But having a strong body also helps you to deal with those things that more than likely one day you're going to face, and those are issues of health. At some point, everybody's body wears out, and at some point everybody is going to face some health challenges. And I would submit to you, I'll share this story with you. I haven't shared it with many people, but 4 months after becoming the Master Chief Petty Officer of the Navy, I was diagnosed with stage 3 cancer. The cancer had spread to my lymph nodes. It was melanoma. It was an aggressive cancer. And I had a choice to make. Either I was going to resign from my position because of what it was going to take to go through the treatments, a couple of surgeries, chemotherapy, and so on and so forth. Or I was going to suck it up and weather the storm and get through this. But I was only going to do it if I could still do everything that was going to be required of me as the Master Chief Petty Officer of the Navy, to include travel, meetings and long hours, and physical training with other sailors, those sorts of things. Fortunately for me, I'd spent my entire adult life, taking care of myself physically. So I felt like I had the physical reserves. I had the reserve tank to be able to tap into, to be able to continue to serve and to get through this cancer treatment. But I will tell you that it took every ounce of my reserves to be able to do that. But then ultimately, it took about 9 months of treatment before I went into remission, and I was able to resume my duties, what I would consider to be more normal. I share that story with you because all of us at some point in our life are going to face some kind of physical challenge. We're going to face some kind of psychological challenge. We're going to face something that's going to require us to dig deep into our physical being, and having the physical stamina to be able to do that is very, very important. And to be a good leader is to set a good example and to take care of yourself, eating correctly, working out at the appropriate level, doing the right things, not drinking to excess, not doing anything to excess, but just look for moderation in what you do. Again, work out consistently and take care of yourself is important, because one is it allows you to take care of yourself, but it also sets a good example for those around you. So I'll move on to the next one. So that, physical, then there's the mental aspect of leading yourself. So the mental aspect, and I'll share with you some examples of things that I think are important. At least they were important to me, and maybe they'll be important to you. So the mental aspect is maintaining a sharp mind. Sometimes it's easy to kind of get caught in a routine or a rut, and we're not going to school. If we're not going to school, to not really continue to develop your mind. One of the things probably 25 years ago that I made the decision to do was embark on a professional reading program. So every day, well, let me be honest, probably 98% of the time, every day, I open up a book and turn the pages and I read. And I try to read things I think are relevant, at least to me. I like focusing on self-help books. I like leadership books. Other people do like fiction, those sorts of things, and that's fine. The important thing is that you're exercising your mind academically. And then also I like to do a lot of personal writing. So when I read something, I like to think about it philosophically, and I like to for me, it helps to write it out, have a conversation with myself that I can then turn around and share with others. And then it's also taking, doesn't have to be, formal education in the sense that you're trying to complete a course or get a grade for school, but taking online instruction, finding something that's going to interest you and then involving yourself in it, and maybe coordinating with other people. But constantly, reading the news, listening to the news, reading books, taking classes, constantly exercising your mind, because that's going to keep you sharp. It's going to allow you to have good conversations, as I mentioned earlier, to be a good critical thinker and a problem solver. Right? You want to be someone who can solve problems. Set a good example, not only to yourself, but others around you. So there's the physical, the mental, then there's the moral aspect of it. To me, the moral aspect of it is just doing the right thing. And we've all heard this before, right? Not just doing the right thing when people are watching you, but doing the right thing all the time, right? And I'll even take it a step further. It's not just doing the right thing, it's thinking about the right things. It's keeping your mind healthy, your moral mind healthy. And again, it's setting a good example. It's doing what's right. It's not engaging in meaningless conversation about talking about somebody. It's not about being a gossiper. It's not about making inappropriate comments. It's not doing something that you shouldn't be doing. It's always about doing the right thing, being virtuous, right? Being a person of high moral character. Now, that's easier said than done, especially when I talk about what are you thinking? What is in your mind? How are you controlling those thoughts? What allows you to do the right thing? Focusing on that on a regular basis and then exercising that. Being uncommon in your approach, right? Because to not take care of yourself really well physically, to not engage in mental exercises, to not always be virtuous or a person of high moral character. So you just got to ask yourself, where are you on that bar? Are you in the middle? Are you somewhat down below? Or are you above it? Or are you way above it, right? To be up here is to be uncommon, right? And ask yourself, do I want to be common? Am I beneath that? Or I'm okay just being somewhere in between? Or do I want to be exceptional? Do I want to be uncommon as a leader? Do I want to have, again, the ability to influence those around me to also carry themselves in a way and do business in a way that's uncommon? Then the last part of what I call leadership fitness is the spiritual part. Now, this can, some people get a little anxious when you have this conversation. I can remember as the MCPON, I never wore my faith on my sleeve, but I was never afraid to talk about it if a sailor brought it up. Now, it's really up to each individual person. I don't know what another person's faith is. I don't know if you're a person that practices faith or you're someone who meditates or whatever the case may be, right? For me, my faith has always been and continues to be important to me. And so if it is, then I must exercise that. I must study, I must understand, I must be around other people that I can have conversations with my faith about, because it's something that rests deep inside me. It's what's always helped me make my decisions as a leader. And so I would submit to any of you that if you're a person of faith or faith is important to you, don't ignore it. You have to treat it like the other three aspects of leading yourself. Do you want to be here, or do you want to be here, right? So physical, mental, moral, and spiritual fitness are so very, very important in leading yourself, because if you're not leading yourself, if you're not uncommon in your approach, then your ability to truly be a leader and influence those around you is not going to be there, right? And if leadership truly is about influence, then you want to put yourself in a position where people don't question you. They don't wonder what your motives are. They don't speculate, is this person genuinely who he is, or is he pretending to be somebody? Now these things can't be developed overnight. It really requires a lifetime of it, but there's no better time to start than today. And I would encourage you to think about those elements I just talked to you about, contemplate them, have conversations with others about them, and then just ask yourself, where do I want to be? Here, here, or here? Make that decision and then go after it. And I hope it's here. Go after it with vigor and go after it with energy and be consistent at it. Look, I think what I've just shared with you is no surprise. We've all had the opportunity to work for a variety of different leaders. You know, look, having rank, title, or position of leadership doesn't make you a leader. I believe that all of us have worked for people that or worked with people, not necessarily for, but with people, that when we sit back and we think about it, we say, you know, that person wasn't my supervisor. Maybe that person might even have been your subordinate, but when you look at them, you said, wow, they had such presence about them. Their ability to speak and people listen, their ability to speak and people believe, that people understand they're genuine in who they are. That person, you could be a first class, a second class, that person could be a third class, an airman, a seaman. It doesn't matter, because when people lead themselves, they influence people across all spectrums. And just think about for a minute, who is the person that you admired the most? Who's the person that you wanted to be like? Chances are that person was practicing many of the elements that I just spoke to you about. Now, it's a shame sometimes when you see somebody doing most of it, but then you see that there's something that they don't do well. And you say to yourself, if they would only do this, they would be the perfect leader, or they would be a great leader. But for whatever reason, they haven't done those things. Right? We've ran into those sorts of leaders. But I would also tell you that to find somebody who does all those things and does them consistently, and look, just because I'm talking about it and I try to do it doesn't mean that I've reached that point, right? I don't want this to come off as, you know, Mike is saying, hey, I'm doing these things, therefore I'm here, right? Number one is I don't get to make that decision. It's only the people that you serve that get to make that decision. What I will say is that I try really hard to achieve that. Chances are I fail far more than I succeed at it, but it will never stop me or prevent me from trying. And I hope the same is true for you. Don't get discouraged if you feel like, hey, I'm not doing this well or I'm not doing that well. Just really tighten up and keep getting after it, keep focusing on it, and eventually it will come. And then you're going to feel at some point like, hey, maybe I've achieved this, or maybe I'm there. And then you're going to have not a good week, not a good day, maybe not even a good month. Don't let that discourage you either. Just pick yourself back up and get back in the game and press on. So Travis, that's, you know, in a nutshell, that's kind of what I wanted to talk about. But what I would like to do now, if the opportunity presents itself, is ask or answer a few questions if anybody has something.
Yeah, you got it. Well, Mike, thank you so much, man. And I got to tell you that so your story is kind of hits close to my home because my dad passed of cancer. So I want to just, that's the fight that you fought through with that, dude. Thanks for sharing that, because I know that's a very sensitive subject. So that means a lot that you're so open with that. So that being said, I have at least one question that's popped in here. So I do encourage anybody who's out there, if you're on Facebook, if you're logged into our Zoom meeting, feel free to ask questions. But the first question that came in is, at what point in your career did you realize a goal of MCPON? And was there any point in your career where you felt like you were stuck or not progressing to your satisfaction? If so, how did you get out of that rut? And that's from Bobby.
Okay. So just a little background. So I grew up on a small Indian reservation in Montana. My family were farmers and loggers. The one thing I learned where I grew up is how to work hard. And I mean how to work really hard, right? I joined the Navy in 1983, and I tell you, all I wanted to do was join the Navy, serve for 4 years, get out of the Navy, come back, and resume my life as a farmer and as a logger. Just because I always felt a deep desire, even as a small kid, that military service was something that I should do because I loved the country that I lived in. I had a great family, was strong. We didn't have much, but what we did have was an appreciation for this country. And so I did. I joined the Navy. I served 4 years. I don't know how I ended up as an aviation structural mechanic, because I'd never even seen an airplane prior to that, but I guess working on tractors and working on helicopters are similar. So anyways, I got out after my first 4 years. I got out for about 6 months. I went back, resumed my life, but it took me just a few months to realize I'd made a grave error, that I really, not only was it about just serving for that period of time, I felt like it was a calling, something I'd like to do as long as I possibly could. So I came back into the Navy, fortunately at that time, and MCPON Smith talked about it. I got out in '87. The Navy was really building up over 600 ships and nearly 600,000 sailors. And so the opportunity for me to come back in was there. And so I did, right? Let me be clear, never once in my life did I ever think about becoming the Master Chief Petty Officer of the Navy. I can remember making first class. I was like, woohoo, now I can do 20 years. That was like a big goal of mine, to be able to get enough, to be able to become a first class, get past the whole high year tenure thing, and at least be able to do 20 years and possibly retire, right? The other thing that I've learned is nobody, and I repeat, nobody can plan for it, right? There's too many things that are not within your control. All you can plan for is to work hard, stay out of trouble, be a good and decent person every single day, do right by your shipmates, and many of those chips will fall where they may. You can't control always where you get orders to. You can't control who you work for. You can't control who works for you. You can only control your environment, right? Do the very best you can, right? And sometimes it's going to work out to your benefit, and sometimes it's going to be more challenging, right? But the grass will always be as green as you want it to be. So number one is never deserved it, never expected it, still don't feel like I ever deserved it. I was just fortunate. I would even say I was blessed to have the opportunity to work for the right people at the right time, right? To have a boss that had bosses that had a lot of faith in me, positioned me correctly, and eventually one day, actually, Teresa and I were actually getting ready to retire. Speaking of Teresa, hold on, Travis. Teresa doesn't know I'm here. She brought me in a sandwich.
Thank you, Teresa.
Okay, thank you, honey. So back where I was at. So Teresa and I were getting ready to retire. I had 29 years in. I was serving as the Fleet Master Chief of Fleet Forces Command. I really didn't see, this coming, and all of a sudden MCPON West puts in his retirement papers. I guess I should have been thinking that he was close to 4 years at the time, which I wasn't. And, Admiral Harvey approached me and said, hey, I'd like to put you in for MCPON. What do you think? And I said, well, I think Teresa and I sold our house. We've got an RV. We've got a truck. We're getting ready to go, travel the world, right? And he says, well, that's not what I'm asking you. What do you think? And I said, I think it'd be an honor to have the opportunity and a relief not to, right? Because I was under no illusion. I saw what MCPON West went through, and I saw the strain and the stress and the challenges of the job. But ultimately, if four-star admiral says, hey, I'm putting you in for something, you go back and talk to your wife and you make preparations because you're going to serve, if the opportunity happens, right? Because there's so many tremendous people out there, and all the talent that is also, had their bosses had put their applications in for them as well. So I guess, in the end, it worked out okay for me, and I had the opportunity to serve as a 13th Master Chief Petty Officer of the Navy. But I say this with all sincerity, never one day that I ever felt like I deserved it. I mean, I've served around some tremendous people, much more capable than me. I went to every, as the MCPON, I went to Dover to participate in the distinguished transfer of remains of every sailor that came back from overseas. And I met with their families, and I often said to myself, no, those are the people that deserve it, right? Because they made the true sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you know that when you're supposed to represent the entire enlisted force for people like that, right? That's a tall order. So all you can do is do your best. But never thought I deserve it. I wouldn't say that I ever felt like I was stuck somewhere in my career. Not because of anything I did. I mean, opportunities presented themselves, and I just did my best to seize the opportunity and do everything I could. There were times when I got orders or I went to places that I thought, oh, this will probably be it for me, but one thing led to another, and I just stayed positive and focused, and it worked itself out in the end. I'm not sure if anything I just said makes sense, but I wanted to share it with you.
That's awesome. That's awesome, Mike. Well, it's a common theme, and that's you've heard me say this a couple of times, is just the humble mentality. When you get to a certain level, there's a certain common theme, and that's being humble with where you've gotten and what you've done.
Travis, I'm going to interrupt you. Most of the time I wasn't at the Pentagon. I would be out, spending time with the fleet. But I share this with everybody that's watching. And I say this with 100%. I would never be disingenuous with you, so trust me. This is the truth. I used to park, same place MCPON Smith parked. It's in the mall parking. I think it was spot 64. And it's pretty close to it's the backside of the Pentagon. You pull up, you're pretty close there. I'd pull in early in the morning, and I would sit in my vehicle and I would look at that building. And not one day went by that I wasn't grateful to have the opportunity to go to work in that building and to represent the men and women that serve in our great Navy. I never, ever took it. I never took advantage of it. I never took it as it was something that I was supposed to have. Every time I parked there and I looked at that building, I made my preparations to go in there. I said to myself, number one, you don't deserve this. Number two, you've been afforded the opportunity. And number three, darn it, you better make the best of that opportunity. And that was the mentality. I went in there every single day for 4 years.
That's awesome. That's awesome, Mike. Well, I think, again, everything that you're offering, I think resonates with, the true leader that you've been in our military. So I want to throw in a question here from somebody you might know as well, Mr. Scott Benning.
Oh,
yes.
We'll
have the pleasure of hearing from tomorrow. He wants to ask about, this is your current role as the director of the Navy League, what is the status of the virtual Air and Sea Space Symposium that your team is hosting? And I mean, you talked about that briefly, so I think this people who follow it, it's a good way to get that out and how you're adapting to the current environment.
Look, one thing I like about working in a 501c3, I don't say for-profit or non-profit because there's no such thing. They're both businesses. One has a different tax filing status than the other. But having run a, quote unquote for-profit business and now running a nonprofit, I would submit to you that both of them come with very unique challenges, but they're both running businesses. So the one thing I do like about the nonprofit world is the transparency. You can go online and you can look at the Navy League's 990. You could see how much money the Navy League generates, what our tax filing status is, so on and so forth. So the Navy League has, and I'm going to get to Scott's question, but I just want to lay a little bit of a foundation, right? So the Navy League has two elements. I'm the CEO of a building, which is the for-profit side, right? I won't talk about that tax filing because that's a for-profit company and it's not something that's made public, right? But then as the executive director of the Navy League generates, and I'll just round the number, right? But generates it's about a $10 million a year business. Sea Air Space generates 70% of the Navy League's operational income every year. Now that gives you any idea of the magnitude of it. It's a 3-day event that we spend 9 months preparing for, right? And that money comes into the Navy League to support the Navy League, so that the headquarters, so that we in turn can support the 200 councils that we have around the world that do all the things for sailors and sea service members, sea service members that we're all accustomed to, right? Homecomings, send-offs, Sailor of the Year, awards dinners and luncheons, and the list goes on, right? So we generate those revenues to be able to support those councils, to be able to do all those things. So when the governor of Maryland signed his executive order, I think it was on the 6th of March, suspending all events of 250 or more people, and now I think it's down to 10 people, effectively, when that decision was made, Sea Air Space was canceled. I mean, the governor canceled it, we didn't cancel it. So imagine you're running a company. I have 30 employees at work that are on the paid staff, right? Imagine you're running a company and all of a sudden 2/3 of your revenue's gone instantly, right? So I won't bore everybody with how we had to, in 5 days, create an entirely new business plan, put together an entirely new budget, and rewrite our entire strategic operating guidance for the remainder of the year. I mean, all that happened instantaneously. And there's no one person that can do that, right? So this is bringing the collective together, using the brain power, the manpower, the synergy of the entire organization to put together this plan and make it happen, right? So one of the things that we wanted to do was, a big part of the Navy League's mission is education, right? Advocacy, education, and support of sea service members and their family. So we had lined up these amazing speakers. We had over 21 panels that were going to happen with multiple speakers, flag and general officers, senior civilians, CEO of industry. I mean, we had all these topics. I kid you not, it was the best lineup of speakers in the history of the Navy League Sea Air Space Expo. We were super excited about it. Every one of our service chiefs were going to be there speaking. Many of our secretaries, CEO of Fortune 500 companies were going to be there. And so we lost it, boom, just like that.
Wow.
So one of, my communications director, her name's Danielle, she comes to me and she says, Mike, how can we repurpose some of these speakers? How can we, get them out there? So we already had a relationship with Channel 8 News. It's actually Channel 7, Channel 8. And Francis Rose, who is their, he's their host, if you will. He's got a show called Government Matters. And we had already established a small relationship with them. I go on there and talk about Navy League issues from time to time. So working with his team, working with our team, and using technology, we were able to put together what we call virtual Sea Air Space. Now, mind you, it's not all the speakers, but it's a good sampling of the speakers. And so starting, I think it's next Monday, the 13th, I'd have it written down on some notes. We're going to air those programs. They'll be on Facebook, they'll be, probably on LinkedIn, but they're going to be around the greater DMV, DC, Virginia, Maryland area. And a couple million people will get to watch them. So Scott, thanks for asking the question, really appreciate it. But that's what we've been able to do. And, this is just one, it's a small piece of hundreds of other things that our team has done, because we encourage a flat organization where everybody has a vote. We really encourage innovation and thinking out of the box, and there's nobody's idea doesn't get looked at and reviewed. And this is one of dozens of examples of things that our team has done to continue to make the Navy League relevant, to keep the business up and running. And oh, by the way, the thing I'm most proud about is that through this process, we didn't lay off a single employee. So that's not easy in this environment, as everyone knows. If you're in the private sector, most companies are taking some kind of hit, especially companies that do things like we're doing, where we have this big exposition that we put on. But thanks to a terrific board that we have, great employees, and then just bringing all that together and figuring ways through this, we were able to accomplish that. I'm talking about the Navy League, but I hope people are relating this to things that they're doing in their life, right? In other businesses. It's so fast, it's dynamic, it's exciting, it's dangerous, it's all these things at one time, but you have to be able to kind of gather yourself. You have to be able to influence your people. You have to set the conditions and maintain the conditions and provide the opportunity for people to have a voice and be successful, right? And so we really feel good about our team. There's really, everybody understands the pecking order, right? There's that. But nobody feels like they're not valued. Nobody feels like they don't have a voice. Everybody feels like they can be a part of the solution, whatever that problem is. And what I've seen is there's been no problem that the team hasn't been able to solve. And unfortunately, I've watched other organizations that may not operate that way. They've struggled significantly because they're not making holistic decisions. They're making decisions that are kind of in this, in this leadership box, if you will, instead of bringing in all the talent around them. So
right.
we've been able to do well, but we look forward to this virtual Sea Air Space coming up next week.
Sounds like great minds think alike. That's why we're doing our virtual summit here, right? That's fantastic. So, Mike, I'm going to toss in a question. I have a couple more questions I want to get to, but I think this is an important facet I want to pay attention to since we have kind of a myriad of people watching you today. It's not just Navy folks. We have, so people are in the corporate world. We have people from other services. So you've literally led at the highest level in our military, and now you're leading at the highest level of the civilian sector. What has been your biggest transition? We talked briefly about this last week. What has been your biggest transition leading a military organization versus leading a civilian organization?
Right, so I'll say it again. You've heard this, so people might understand, hey, maybe I need to pay attention to this, right? Right, it really is about influence. It's about a leader's ability to touch the hearts and the minds of their people, to create an environment, to create an organization that people feel like they matter, and they shouldn't just feel like they matter, they must matter, right? So 95% of everything I learned during my time in uniform, it transfers over to the private sector. Leadership really is leadership, right? It's the ability to influence others. It's all the things that we've heard, right? How you treat people, how you talk to people, how you, when I say care for people, that doesn't always mean that you're doing things for them, right? It means that you're leading them in a way that they can ultimately care for themselves more than you can care for them, right? So all that was transferable. What wasn't transferable, like in the Navy, we get a budget, right? And we make sure that we try to spend it appropriately. We buy parts and fuel and do all these things, right? And we try to enter into decent contracts and so on. But if we run out of money for parts and fuel and all that, we're still going to get paid, right? Twice a month, you're going to get a paycheck, right? You don't worry about your health care. You don't worry about your paycheck. You don't worry about, is the organization going to have to file bankruptcy? Is the organization going to have to go out and get a loan to be able to make it through to the next payroll? I didn't worry about that in the Navy, right? And when I got out, I went into a pure civilian organization, right? It was a marketing company, and it had owners, and I had to be able to, you had to not only, pay your employees and all the benefits and, manage the P&L and all the HR aspects of it. But owners of companies also want their shares. At the end of the year, you got to pay them dividends, right? And if you're not providing the dividends, or you're not balancing the budget or doing the things that you're supposed to be doing running a private company, small company or medium-sized company, you're out, right? I will tell you, they hired me not because I was the former Master Chief Petty Officer of the Navy. They hired me because they believed that I held positions, like many of the sailors that are watching this now, held positions where we learned how to get things done, right? I've found it in the private sector, oftentimes they end up an inch deep and a mile wide, right? They're trying to do a lot of things because they're trying to generate money. There's the entrepreneurial spirit. There's trying to, raise capital, doing other things. And sometimes what happens is you get spread thin, right? So you're going lateral, but you're not going vertical. You're not getting it into the end zone. So the owner of the company just said, hey, we need someone that can get it in the end zone, right? We're an inch deep, we're a mile wide. He says, and I learned this. He said, most people can get it into the red zone, but not many people can get it into the end zone. So, sailors are mission oriented, service members are mission oriented. They understand that they have to complete the mission, right? That's getting it in the end zone, whether it's, hey, we've got an airplane, it's in North Island, a helicopter, it's broke, the ship's, getting underway, we got to get that bird out there. But we're going to get it out there. The bird can't stay back. We're going to figure it out, right? That's how we learn to get things done. So that's the reason they brought me over. Now, I had no practical business experience, right? I don't have an MBA, right? And so when I got there, I realized, wow, I can lead people, right? I'm building a pretty good team. People trust me. They're listening to me. We're getting things done. But now I got to figure out I got to get with my CPAs. I got to get with my controllers. I got to, get with our folks to learn how to run the business. So for me, that was like going night school, right? And I say that I got my MBA through the School of Hard Knocks because I didn't want to fail, right? I wanted this company to know, hey, you can go out there and hire an enlisted service member, that has some business experience, bring them in, and what they don't know, they're going to learn it really, really fast, right? Because we do have the ability to do that too, right? So in that 2.5 years that I was running, almost 3 years, I should say, running that company as a COO and CEO, it was practical leadership experience, learning new things, coupling those together, which ultimately, provided me an opportunity now to, run the Navy League of the United States. Now, coming out of the Navy, I don't think I could have stepped into the role I'm in right now because it just requires too much business understanding. And that's not something, and not just, business understanding from an academic point of view, but from a practical point of view. But when they ultimately offered the position to me, I felt very confident in the ability to do that. And every sailor that's watching this now should feel the same way, right? You're going to learn so much in what you're doing right now, but also, phone's ringing, but also don't forget, that mental fitness aspect that I mentioned to you, right? Learn as much as you can now, develop those critical thinking skills, right? So that when you get it, when and if you get out, you can go acquire some of those skills through, hands-on. And what you'll find yourself doing is rapidly accelerating beyond your civilian peers because you have the leadership, you have the operational understanding, you become a quick learner, right? You've developed these attributes because you've got a good study program. You're going to couple those together, and within weeks or months, you're going to find yourself like up here, right? And Travis, there was a Master Chief out in San Diego when I was at this company that said, Mike, I'm getting ready to retire. What should I do? And I said, hey, listen, you're a command master chief. You're an HR professional. Get your SHRM certification, right? Which is what they want in the private sector. Get a job. I don't care if it's $60,000 a year as a master chief. That's not beneath you. Just get your foot in the door, right? And I guarantee you in 6 months, you'll be making six figures, right? And he did. He went and got his SHRM certification. He went and got a middle level HR job with the company, right? But they quickly recognized who this guy was and what capabilities he had. And within 6 months, he went from 60,000 to six figures.
I
Right.
love it. I love it. Well, Mike, that's a great insight because again, we have a kind of a mixed audience. I appreciate that. So that being said, we're always trying to strive to learn. And I know you're a big person of self-education, right? So a question that we've been asked a couple of times, the one from our live audience is Jason Dupree. What's up, Jason? He asked, being an avid reader, and another person asked, so I'm kind of combining this question with a couple other people. What is your #1 book that you would recommend for leadership?
So I'm glad the question was asked because I was going to bring it up anyways, right? So I actually pulled them, you know, my bookshelf is over here, but I pulled a couple books off. So Scott and I are both readers. Scott Benning, who I think is still there, we're both avid readers, and he's also a fan of John Maxwell. So I'm going to hold this book up right here. Right. I don't know. Is that, can you see can you read it?
Irrefutable Laws of Leadership.
Right. So John Maxwell, 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, in my opinion, is one of the best leadership books, all around leadership books ever written. Right. There's only one. I'm going to hold up another book here. I think is the only book that can hold a candle to this book. Now, John Maxwell has a lot of books out there and I've read most of them. Right. But I would submit to you that they're all kind of a spin off of this. Right. Like he'll take a section of this book and he'll write a whole nother book. Right. And so, look, John Maxwell, I don't work for John Maxwell, right? He's not paying me to put this up there, but there's not a person that's watching right now that if they get this book and they read this book will not be better off for having had the experience. I promise you that. And then the other book I only brought up two, Travis. So this one's a classic, right? So this is Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People. Right. When you talk about just learning how to be a good and decent person, how to work well with other people, how to influence people. I mean, Dale Carnegie was born in the 1800s and this book was written, I think, in the 30s. Right. But it's timeless. Like you can read this book and think it was written yesterday. The insight that he had, you know, back when he wrote this book. So these two books right here.
Yeah, and I got to tell you that Dale Carnegie book, I'm sure you know that they actually have updated that and they said how to win friends and influence people in the digital age.
Right.
So they have done a refresh on it, which is really cool when you can take those perspectives, like you said, so long ago and apply them to today's world because it really hasn't changed.
So I've had this book right here for about 15 years.
Wow.
And the one thing I do is I reread it every year. Right. Not because I can't remember what's in it, but because I feel that it's that important to refresh myself, because what this book really talks about is how to treat people.
I love it.
How to communicate with people. Right. And really talks about, you know, Dale Carnegie drives it home. Is there, you know, there's that saying, we've probably all heard it before, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Right. And, you know, people are not so much interested in you as they are interested in what is it that you can talk to me about that will help me, right? And he really drives that home, and learning how to communicate with your people in a way that they benefit from it, right? Doesn't make me feel good that I'm talking to you about me, right? If you're going to talk about yourself, tell a story, right? Give them something that they can relate to, right? Oh, so this happened to you, right? But ultimately, whatever you're talking to them about needs to connect to them. Right. Otherwise, you're just promoting yourself. And if I've done any of that today, I apologize. That's not my intent.
Not at all. Not at all, Mike. And that's why it's like I appreciate your leadership, because like you said, it's about influencing others. And when you look at these books, like for me, just so you know, I have to listen to books because I have an attention span of a gnat sometimes. So if I start reading, I'll fall asleep. But if I'm out actively running or something like that, listening to books is another way to bring in that knowledge. So, man, Mike, thanks so much for your time today. And so I'll have one last question for you that I want to throw out there is, what is your next goal in life? You've already had some pretty amazing milestones met, and we all know that life is sometimes about having those short-term, mid-term, and long-term goals. And as you already mentioned, you never had MIPCON as your goal, but you obviously surpassed your goal. So do you have a next goal?
Yeah, it's so funny you asked that question. So this morning I got up and put my earphones in, right? My earpods.
I'm going to be bringing in our next speaker while you're answering, if that's
Oh, sure.
okay.
I, put my earpods in, and I was just listening to some light music, and I was walking, and I was actually asking myself that question. I mean, I've been with the Navy League for about 14, 15 months now. I'm in no hurry to leave the Navy League. I enjoy what I'm doing. It's a noble mission. But, at some point, I'll probably have to make a change. So I'm thinking through that right now, Travis. I don't know what that will be. If Teresa has her way, it'll be a Class A motorhome, and it'll be traveling the country for the next 10 years, But I think she also knows that I'm somebody that wants to be involved in things. Being a part of something like the foundation, the leadership foundation. I was really hoping and looking forward to going out and speaking with people face to face in May, but unfortunately we can't do that. So this is certainly the next best thing. So good on you for being innovative and putting this all together. But I really do enjoy speaking with people. I don't want to be presumptuous and think that what I have to say is all that important. I'm more interested when I talk with people when they have questions, to be able to just have a conversation. That's the difficult thing about this, is it's not as conversational as you'd like to be. But I like to be engaged in conversation to provoke thought and, almost philosophical in nature. When you're doing this, it's more, this is my thoughts, take them or leave them, right? I like it to be more of a back and forth. So maybe I'll get involved in doing things like that, just to stay busy and to be active, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. But hey, I know we got to go. The next speaker's lining up, and I just want to say thank you for the opportunity. And once again, to everybody watching, my thoughts and prayers are with you. Please stay safe, and thank you for your service to our nation. And if you're not serving in uniform, thank you for being a great citizen and serving our country, because both of them come with their challenges. Trust me, I've learned that over the last 4 years. So take care of yourself. And if David Derry is watching, I wanted to also thank David for the opportunity. He's been a good friend for a long time, and I have a tremendous amount of respect for him. And I thank both of you for giving back, in the private sector as well as you did while you were in uniform. So good luck to everybody, and thank you for your time.
Mike, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate you. And you always have a spot here with our foundation. If you ever need to get off your chest and speak a little bit, just let us know, and we'll give you whatever microphone we have. Okay.
Yeah, and hey, look, you got some great speakers lined up here. I mean, I know many of them, and the ones I don't know, I've read up and had a chance to meet them yesterday. And man, what an all-star lineup! The folks that are able to, come in on this Zoom cast or whatever we're calling it.
Right.
Really fortunate to be able to listen to some of these folks. So I just want to also say thanks to them for joining, and all the best to all the speakers as well. Thank you, Travis.
Absolutely. Thanks for your time, Mike. I appreciate it. Have a great day. I really appreciate it.